Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bourbon Bites. My name is Clifton. Welcome to another Thursday night live stream. Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us here shortly from a brand that I just recently learned about, but they are involved with some really fun projects. But first, I want to say hello to some few folks here. I know people are still gathering. We started on time this time, which is surprising. Usually, I'm a little bit late, so there's not as many people here yet. So we'll give them a moment. We're also streaming over on Twitch. I'm trying that out again. I used to do that a while back ago. So if you're watching on Twitch, say hello. I can still see your comments. But for those of you here on YouTube, please be sure to say hello. I see, first of all, we have a super chat from the incredible Tammy Brennicky coming in saying, sending love from Mama Brennicky. Thank you so much, Tammy. Tammy and Brian have been supporters of the channel for many a years. So it's so good to see you here. If you're able to make it. But see, everyone's saying, wow, on time. Oh, what's up? What's up, Zopher and Donnie? Thanks so much for tuning in. Don Nishida, all the way over from Hawaii. So good to see you in the chat. So this was a fun one. Like I said, I've not had any of their products before tonight. So I'm really, really excited to taste through them and talk to their, not just representative from the brand. I guess I'll just introduce them. Might as well just jump into it. So please welcome to the stream the Director of Education and Blender from the brand. Please welcome Brandon Cummins. What's up, Brandon?
What's up, Clifton? How are you, man?
So good to have you. So first of all, welcome. I know you talked a little bit. You had this whole plan, like we're going to show all your nerdy stuff behind you, but you had a power issue. But I appreciate the effort, though. I appreciate it.
It's all good. It's all good.
Well, awesome. Welcome to the show. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with this. Is it a relatively new brand, the High and Wicked name?
Yeah, so High and Wicked as a brand, our first release came out in 2020, like the best time to release a new brand to the market.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, relatively new in that respect, but, it has been like a long baked project leading up till then or up till now. So, relatively new still, though.
Gotcha. Well, very cool. Well, tonight we're going to actually be trying two different expressions. One is the straight rye whiskey. This is the 49.1% ABV release. And then we have the special edition. This is the High and Wicked single grain Irish whiskey, which I'm really excited to talk about. This is a fun one. So I know you guys have some other products that you'll probably be tasting through as well. So, well, first of all, I guess tell us a little about yourself.
Sure.
We talked about the brand's new, but how long have you been with the company? What have you been? What's your story?
So I grew up in the restaurant industry. My family owned bars and restaurants all around Kansas and Missouri. My dad had a spot that was open for 47 years called Poor Richard's in Topeka, Kansas. And so I literally grew up sleeping in booths and, I was around the bar all the time. And then into college, bartended my way through college. But you got to imagine growing up in the restaurant industry, especially, and my aunt was the head chef and she was also the head baker. I'm constantly nosing and smelling and tasting everything humanly possible except for the booze. Because I definitely wasn't of age for that. But
Sure.
no, I mean, so just fell in love with olfactory. And of course, my whole life, I was I'm never going to be in the industry. I'm never going to get into the bar and restaurant industry. Bartended my way through college, ran a wine bar there, and then got deep into it after that. So I helped open a craft cocktail bar here in Kansas City called Manifesto, and then started a cocktail festival called the Paris at the Plains. Got involved with a nonprofit focused on agave production and sustainability efforts, and so got really deep into tequila and mezcal. And at the end of the day, I basically have somehow shown up as the director of education now because, as we like to say, I'm the nerdiest guy in the company that just asks questions nobody else has asked before about production process. So, they kind of just said, do you want to just write the materials? And here you go. And then when High and Wicked was kind of first being conceived, it's kind of okay, well, you already nose and taste all the things for the rest of the portfolio. So clearly you're going to do that for the whiskeys too, right? And it's yeah, okay. So that's a little bit of my background. I've been with Altamar now for 10 years. So I finally hit my decade mark there, which was pretty rad.
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, I'm a lifelong industry guy, whether I, accept that or not. So
I was that was a lot. I was trying to keep track of everything. Wow. Yeah, you've really been around it. So you said agave spirits were kind of your intro, other than cocktails, that's kind of your intro into the spirits industry.
To a degree. I mean, so the wine bar was really the very first, and it was obsessive learning about, and I always joke that was during college, right? And I studied harder for the tests at the wine bar than I did for anything for my degree. But, so it's just this idea of no, it's not just about a wine pairing and knowing that knowledge, but it's about like you're going to pair that with a food and like together you're going to elevate that whole experience. And that's where like light bulb kind of clicked.
Mm.
And then spirit wise, yeah, like agave was for sure like my first love. Although like admittedly, like I started in American whiskey, like I think most people, did. And it's like I'm now one of those guys who was like, we used to have Weller 12 as, our like Weller white label was our pour that was only like $6 or $8 a pour back in the day. So anyways, it's been it's been a journey, that's for sure. So
well, that's awesome. Let's go to hear. Like that's my channel is mostly whiskey and bourbon focused, but a lot of times I will explore different spirits. I love doing rums. We'll talk a little bit about Foursquare rum here in a bit, but it's one of my absolute favorites distilleries in the world of rum. But yeah, so I love exploring different things, and these guys in the chat also do as well. I want to say a couple of more hellos that people are joining. The usual crowd that's used to me being late is now showing up. So first of all, I see someone new in the chat, Hunt Patterson. Good to see you in the chat. Glad to have you here. Devin Patel is back, and Donnie, one of our amazing mods, is telling people to hit the thumbs up button if you guys are enjoying the stream, and of course subscribe if you are enjoying the show. Our friend Bill over on Twitch, Dungeons and Drams, which was a D&D campaign I was part of.
Yes.
Recently finished up the campaign, but always a great time. Good to see Bill over on Twitch. Emily is here, another amazing mod of the channel. James Taylor, a patron and supporter of the channel. And yeah, so great to see those folks here live. And of course, I know a lot of you folks are watching the replay. So if you're watching the replay, make sure to leave a thumbs up and a comment down below what your favorite expression was from tonight's lineup. Well, before let's go ahead and get something in our glass, shall we? So where do you recommend we start? Do you think we start with the rye or the Irish whiskey?
Let's start with the rye. We'll definitely start with the rye. And I got to give you a little bit of history on the brand because we'll get it.
I was going to ask, as I was pouring, I was going to ask you that. So go ahead.
So, honestly, it all goes back to our founder. So our founder and CEO, and I got to give his full name because his name is epic. It's William Lee Lyons Brown III. Right. So it's one of those names, right?
I like that. Yeah.
Lyons is a Brown, formerly a Brown foreman. So, and his familial legacy, like his father created Woodford Reserve. His grandfather is who purchased Jack Daniels from the Motlow family. And then his great great grandfather is George Garvin Brown, of course, whose signature is on every bottle of Old Forester in the world. Right.
Wow.
So we always joke that it wasn't like if we were going to get back into whiskey, it was just really when. But, we stayed out of it for a long time, largely in respect to that family legacy. And at the same time, like if we got back into it, everyone's going to be pretty scrutinous about what we were doing. So we were kind of kicking the idea around of launching this brand that was centered around celebrating provenance and transparency and like sourcing product initially, but like, what could we then do to elevate where the source is coming from, right? So let's be super transparent about this was distilled by these folks. This was the mash bill, barrel entry, barrel exit type of still used, all that stuff, right? As much geekery as we could fit on there possible. And then it evolved into a gentleman called and was just like, hey, I've got access to several rick houses. I've been collecting bourbon. We're like, cool, you're a bourbon collector. I get it. He's like, no, I've been collecting barrels. It's like, okay, well, what are we talking about? And he's like, I have over 100,000 barrels. And we were like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, we've been sourcing from every distillery imaginable, every mash bill imaginable, every, maturation protocol you could think of. And so Lyons said, Brandon, did you realize that you could go to heaven without dying? Here's your opportunity. And he was like, can I just start sending you samples? And so this is kind of the evolution of it. And what we ended up determining from this is, we kept coming back to some Kentucky liquid, and we were like, man, this is really incredible. There's these ryes that keep bubbling up to the top. So why don't we send out some blinds? So I sent out 7 blind tasting samples of rye whiskey to a bunch of colleagues, bartenders, distillers, blenders, sommeliers in the industry. And I was just like, hey, of these 7 rye whiskeys, I want you guys to rank them. And we consistently started getting 2 that kept bubbling up to the top. And then similarly, we sent 9 bourbons out. Also to the same group, and we had 1 that kept coming in at the very top. And so we ended up getting in touch with the distilleries that were making the product directly. And we said, hey, for 1, you guys have consistently come in all these blinds. For 2, would you be willing to work with us with new make and developing our own kind of processes and protocols? So we already know you guys are rock star distillers, but we want to partner with you to kind of develop our take on what this could be. And so, this is one of the only open partnerships that I believe they have, but New Riff is our distillery on our rye, but it's not your standard new riff mash bill, right? Your standard new riff mash bill is 95% rye and then 5% malted rye. But we're at 91.9, so we're at 91 rye and 9% malted barley, and the barley was like substantially different than the malted rye was. Yeah, and then we went into everything like, okay, so if we're talking barrel like maturation protocols, where are we getting the barrels from? And what's the forestry on the oak? What is the seasoning level? What's the toast? What's the char? And then ultimately, what I always joke is like one of the most expensive aspects of the whole thing is like also what's our maturation protocol? Where are we sitting in the actual cellar, in the rick house itself? And so we basically set like we want to be on the top 2 floors as best as we can, which so it really like gets really good extraction pretty early. So yeah, that's probably way more.
No, that's great. Well, I was going to say,
answer, but
that was one of the first things I noticed on the bottle, honestly. So this is the bottle of the rye. And I was like, straight rye. Oh, but then I was like, oh, Kentucky straight rye whiskey. So I got a little curious. I'm like, okay, let me flip around and see what info is on there. But you guys actually put on the bottle, you say, distilled at New Riff Distilling, which is awesome. I think, like you said, you're one of the only brands that can actually put that on the bottle that's not transparent about it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, and honestly, I wish we could say the same for our bourbon, but the distillery on our bourbon was very much like, we love you guys, but we're going through some stuff right now, and we can't let you put our name on the label. They're like, so, Lyons came back to me, and he's like, okay, are you prepared to go out here? Is the bourbon good enough that you're like, you can go out here and talk about it without telling the story of like who the guys are that are making? And I was like, yeah, because it's that good. So
yeah, I mean, it's not always. I mean, these people in the chat will know, like, as much transparency as possible is always appreciated, especially of those of us that really consider ourselves enthusiasts, because we want to know, like, we're not being judgmental. It's like, no, we want to know the most about what we're trying.
Yes.
And I noticed that you guys have some, even like, you guys have a ton of info here on this label. I mean, I can't really fully hold on, let me see if I can make my screen bigger, and then you can walk us through some of the info we see here. Let me see if I can do this. If this cuts you out, I'll come back, I promise.
All good.
There we go, a little bit bigger. So yeah, so here's the label. So you guys put some really great info. If it'll focus, it might be kind of hard because it's kind of small text.
Yeah, that outer ring. I mean, so like this was the original inception of the brand, right? We were like, we want to put as much on this label as humanly possible. So it's just like, okay, like seasoned new medium toast, like white oak number 4 char for a minimum of 5 years, right? So real age statement, then like also breaking all that down, 91% rye, 9% malt, the type of still that's being used, and depending upon the release, like when we get to the Foursquare later, like that's one where we wanted to cram even more information on there because it's like, this is a limited one-off. Whereas, the Kentucky straight rye, like that's intended to be a flagship all day, every day. Now I will say, like, again, real age statement, right? So aged 5 years. But we are, that was being blended down 30 barrels out of a batch of 200. And so we do have significant holdback. And we've been laying down like 500 to 1,000 new make barrels annually, thereabouts. So I mean, this is definitely a long-term thing, but we're now finally, this year will be the first year that I can actually start integrating some 6-year, and then ultimately a little bit of 7-year, some 8-year, and then I also have some secret projects that I'm blending down, which is also why it's like I'm gonna hold some of these barrels because, like, frankly, there's some really rad stuff happening here. So
wow. Well, so you say you start with the new make. So like with, for example, the rye, it's like you're getting that new make, that custom mash bill from New Riff. Where are you aging? Are you aging it in Kentucky as well, or are you aging it somewhere else?
Yeah, so it's all aging in Kentucky. There's a portion of it that was kind of already aging that was pretty similar to protocols that we wanted. Like we evolved some of the maturation protocol a bit, but so it's all aging in Kentucky, but essentially a good chunk of it is aging at New Riff. And Jay Erisman, who's one of the founders of New Riff, is a good old friend and actually from the Altamar side of things. So we used to be the importer for Tequila Ocho, and Jay actually ended up buying like the very first single barrel of Tequila Ocho in the United States from Party Source, which was the liquor store that he used to own, which is in the parking lot of New Riff. But so just like it was wild that like we ended up like discovering these guys as being like these amazing rock star distillers, and it's like, wait a second, we've known Jay for years. And it's like, and he's just like, yeah, of course, like, yeah, let's do this, I love you guys, I love what you're doing. So yeah, it was a very kismet thing, so
oh, that's awesome. And by the way, if you guys are in the chat, feel free to leave any comments or questions. I'm trying to keep up. So we see Zover says info on bottles is always appreciated. Yes, that's kind of what I was saying, like we love seeing that. Live from the patios here. Good to see you. Devin Patel says, dang, that's real. Love the info. Yes, we definitely do. Donner Pass whiskey here as well. Tammy says Clifton has a palate from the gods. I assume that means share with friends. Why not? And Zover says Tequila Ocho. You got a fan of Tequila Ocho here in the chat as well. Yeah, Zover has given me a lot of agave spirit recommendations. He's
Awesome.
based in San Diego. So
Love it.
Gets all the good stuff. That usually California's really lucky with agave spirits. I'm not really sure, if you guys are where you guys are distributing out, not just not just High and Wicked, maybe even some of the other brands. Are you guys in California?
We absolutely are. Yeah. So we're in 41 states.
Okay, wow.
So we've got pretty wide distribution. We were the original importer for Tequila Ocho. Unfortunately, it's like seeing like your ex-girlfriend, but like she's also out there with like a guy that you're like, he's really good though. Like, I want to be mad, but I can't be mad. So I mean that's like Ocho in that situation. But yeah, no, we've got actually really good presence out in California. We just changed over to Winebow as our new distributor out there, but they're crushing it for us and they're awesome. So yeah, big fan.
So cool. And then Tanner Austin in the chat says, anything from Brandon, I will be a fan. So
thanks, man.
So we got some fans here in the chat as well.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. So tell us, I'm going to go ahead and start nosing and tasting this rye, but tell us what was the decision to go with that mash bill? Like you said, the 91% rye and then the 9%. You said is it the barley or the malted?
We're going with barley. So since New Riff was using the rye, I mean, it came down to like, what are we getting different with the barley, right? We had way more chew. We had way more like biscuity note. It wasn't nearly as sharp and spicy of a rye. And ultimately that was kind of like the goal. So the name High and Wicked comes from an old cowboy poem written back in the early 1900s. And the dude's name is Bruce Kiskadon. So if you want to go dig up some weird cowboy poetry from the 1900s, because that's totally a thing. But like in it, he basically writes like the best rodeo broncos, buck plum High and Wicked. So like if you want to win the rodeo, you've got to deal with the fight in the bronco. And so that's very much like, for me, like the ethos of what we were trying to do here. And this is going to be my first F-bomb for the night.
Hey, he asked, this is one of the first questions you asked me, like, can I swear? I'm like, yes. YouTube has a rule. Like the first 30 seconds, you're not supposed to. But I'm going to hold off.
So we internally, we refer to it as what the fuckiness. And the goal is like we don't necessarily want it to be, even though it's like a 91% rye whiskey, we don't want it to be a massive spice bomb. Like I'm actually trying to blend this for softness and for more fruit forwardness. Still, obviously, you have all the rice spice there, but the goal is actually to be a little what the fucky. And then again with the bourbon, it's actually the inverse, where the bourbon is a spice bomb. So it's 39% rye in the mash bill. Only 51% corn, 39 rye, 10% malted
really
barley.
Rye and bourbon. Wow.
Yeah, and then it's a sweet mash. It's not a sour mash, because that was the only way that we could really tame that like aggressive spice. But ironically, normally if I was tasting you almost any other brand, I would taste you bourbon and then rye. Sure. But with High and Wicked, I flip it. It's like you've got to go rye before bourbon, because the bourbon is so much more spicy than the rye. But done so on purpose, right? So I'm curious to get your thoughts too. Like I'm just chatty Cathy right now. So.
Well, I was going to say, so it actually, it's been a minute since I've had New Riff's rye. I know they have some of the older expressions. I know they have the malted rye. I think I had a 6-year recently of that. But I really haven't tried their standard, 95.5 mash bill in a while. And I know they've been putting out some really good, well-aged stuff. But I will say this does remind me of how, like I said, it's been a long time, how fruit forward their whiskeys are just across the line. It's like, it's something about the new make that they're using. It's like, it has, I think their bourbon gives me like a green apple note. I don't get necessarily green apple on this. This though, it is like, I'm getting almost like a berry fruitiness. I'm curious what kind of tasting notes you look for with this one.
I mean, so in general, like the way that I blend, because again, I'm sitting down and I'm blending from 200 barrels roughly at a time. I'm taking those and I'm basically sequestering chunks into different blocks. And this is actually a technique that I talked through. Goodness, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the blender for Pinhook. And he was kind of saying, he's like, logically, I separate into blocks. And I was talking with another good friend who's another blender, and they're like, yeah, you just need these are your spicy guys, these are your chocolate guys, these are your fruity guys, right? And so that's very much the approach. Like, where are my fruits? Where are my spices? Where are my chocolates? Where are my like vanillin barrel? And then I always rank them on intensity. So it's kind of getting into like some of those factors, and then trying to construct the blend from that. Like, I know I want more fruit, and generally I'm looking for, like, again, like you were saying, I'm looking for tree fruits, right? So I'm looking for like apples and pears for days, for sure. But then if I do get any berry notes, like I'm immediately noting like, oh, that was a cranberry, that was a cherry, that was a little blackberry situation, like, and those will get flagged. So like, am I going to use those as an increment in the blend, or am I going to set those aside as a single barrel because they're also so what the fucky, right? Like,
Yeah, well, going in for a second sip, it's not. I know I find more of those apple notes that I kind of
Sure.
come to expect from the brand, but there's like a bit of a dessert quality, but it's like I don't know if like a pie crust or something, but it
Hmm.
has a like a character that I don't find in rye very often. Usually, I find that in bourbon, and it could be from the age as well.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, yeah, I think this is kind of like as a bourbon and rye lover, this one almost like confuses me. I'm like, if I tried it blind, would I know bourbon rye? I actually don't
Right.
know because it has some of those big like because I usually get those baked notes in a
Yeah.
bourbon, so it's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, for
A
sure,
question
baking
coming in from
spice.
Hunt. Yes, for sure. So Hunt asks, exit proof compared to entry proof, and why? See, I told you. I mean, I
I
don't know if
know.
that's one of your friends, but like my group is nerdy too, so we love this
Yeah,
info.
Hunt is a good friend, and he knows some of the peaks behind the curtain on some of these things. But I mean, so like entry proof on these, we're actually going in at about 115. Um,
Okay.
Actually, sorry, no, these first batches we went in closer to 125. We went in hotter. Now we've adjusted down a little bit to go into 115 for some of the future batches because we want different extractions, right? And also just like I want more colors to paint with
Mm,
because
okay.
by the way, one of the other like wild things about New Riff that like we got to determine or discuss with them was do you want us to homogenize the spirit, right? Like do you want us to tank it and blend it together, or do you want to go straight from fermenter into barrel, right? So fermenter
Okay.
to still right into barrel. So we kept it isolated, so every 12 barrels there's a change in fermentation tank. So like every 12 barrels it's like a totally new
Mm.
whiskey. So
Wow. Okay.
it's like the color again, like the colors that I get to paint with from a blending perspective are just wildly different compared to. And again, I can't say who's making our bourbon, but like our bourbon is dead consistent, like
Gotcha.
across almost all the barrels. Like it's just wild comparing the two. But yeah, no. So entry proof, sitting at about 125 on the first batches. We're going at 115 as we were evolving the recipes a bit. And then the final bottling proof, I've got two stories here. Number one, we always bottle to taste. So
Mm.
I get I get blind panels set up all over the United States. And again, I will send out about 7 or 8 different proof points and we'll determine, okay, is there a sweet spot for this particular recipe? Right. And so in this instance, like we were really dialing into this like 48, 49, 50, like right around 100 proof. And I came back and I was testing some of the samples and it's like, oh man, like 50%, like that's going to be the winner. So I go and I retest it, like I hydrometer test it again. Turns out my 50% sample that I'd sent out was actually at 49.1. And so I was like, well, wait a second.
Oh,
Like,
did it change when you, or just it just was off the measurement?
no. So I was like, okay, so I messed it up. Maybe I flip flopped my 49 with my 50. So I
Oh,
go
I
and
see.
I test my 49. Oh no, it's dead on at 49. So like the
Oh,
49.1
wow.
ranked above the 49, and I was like, well, what about the 50? Like, where'd that go? So I sent out another set that was just 49, 49.1, and 50, just to again like gut check it. And sure enough, 49.1 came back as the favorite, and I was
Wow.
like, I guess this is
That
what we're doing now.
small
Yeah.
difference in proof, like that's so crazy. Like you did it blind again, and that still came out on
Well,
top.
and I
That's
mean,
that's the craziness of it.
you got to wonder if it's like because again that's the middle sample and there's always like there's a little bit of this like do people always gravitate towards the middle whatever it is.
Oh,
And so
okay.
it's like there's a little bit of the tradecraft of it, but like it's still one of those like, man, that's so weird. Like we did this with a tequila. We did this with a tequila about 6, 7 years ago, and we did a blind with bartenders from both Mexico and the United States where we actually like made cocktails, but it
Mhm,
was unanimous. Like you never have a unanimous result in a blind, but
mhm.
every participant in all 5 cocktails we tested picked the exact same proof point, which was one of those. It's
Oh,
like,
really?
holy
Wow.
crap! I guess we're definitely bottling it at 89 proof, because that's the result. So here we go.
Oh, well, that's a fun story. That like, I think that's what makes it unique too. It's like, I mean, I love a good 100 proof whiskey, but when I see
Yeah,
something like that, I feel like it's either intentional. I normally assume it's intentional, but now I'm
yep,
like, maybe some just an
yeah, or it's
accident.
or it's a mistake, and that just happened to be the one that worked out the best. It's a happy accident, right?
Definitely. A few other folks showing up here. Whiskey Knows. What's up, Marty? Good to see you. Another great whiskey tube channel here. Our friend Swan, who is a Patreon supporter, and Four Leaf Whiskey, another one of my favorite whiskey tube channels. She does a bunch of Irish
Woo woo,
whiskey on her channel. She is a huge fan of High and Wicked Irish whiskey. So,
awesome.
Stacy, so good to see you here in the chat. Zover says blind tasting is always revealing. Yes, that's why I do a lot of blinds here on my channel. I think I have certain opinions on things, and I do it blind, and completely blows my mind of like what I actually find out that I prefer. So,
So I was going to ask you. There was the you did the blind tasting with the rums, right? That had like It was the real McCoy was in there, and then you had like
Oh yeah.
Foursquare detente. So I
Mhm.
was actually watching through that earlier this afternoon, but I didn't make it up to the reveal. Like obviously I knew from the show notes that I was like, oh, okay, like I know what these are. So I'm just
Okay.
curious, like what was your reaction when he actually revealed the rums?
Gosh, I feel like that. Okay, first of all, that was a long
Yeah,
time ago. That was like at least a year and a half ago, I
yeah.
think. And I do a live stream every week, so I don't remember, but I do know that I don't remember what all was in that flight. I know that was, were they all Barbados rum, or is that
No,
what
there were three
oh
Barbados rums, and then there was like Panama Pacific, and then there was one more that
oh
was from Mauritius.
oh well, that's a really old video, man. That's like 3 or 4 years, man. So I have no idea what my opinion was there. But
I
I will
love it.
say I did another stream that was a little more recently. It's still been a
Mhm.
while, where I did a bunch of all Barbados rum. So I had Real McCoy, I had Foursquare, and then I had Dorley's, which is
Yep.
the Total Wine brand. And it's kind of like it surprised me how, I mean, it didn't surprise me how similar they were, but at the same time, it surprised me how like they seem like they're for different markets, but they all have the same core, like
Yeah.
just I really love Barbados rum. And by the way, if you guys didn't know, Foursquare, you guys is part of Altamar Spirits as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we are the importer for the exceptional cast selections, for Probitas rum, for RL Seal's 12 year, and that's kind of it. Like
Mhm.
we don't play with the real McCoy, or I
Gotcha.
mean, like we
Okay.
play nicely with them, but like
Yeah.
we don't import real McCoy, we don't import Dorleys as much as we'd like to. Some like it just I mean, frankly, like that's before our time, so like we don't want to mess with those things. But
Sure. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I guess this is a natural transition to the next one. I mean, well, first of all, before we switch over, the rye. What is the price point on the rye?
so I will say like it's not inexpensive. The SRP is about $79.99.
Okay.
And like I always get to explain to people, they're just like, well, why is this so much more expensive than regular new riff? It's like, well, because it's you're going and asking somebody to make a whole different recipe and
Right.
change everything over, and then and then we're also insisting upon like, and these are our maturation protocols. So it's like even the real estate for the barrels is more expensive, but
Mhm.
we just got a really nice wrap up in Paste. So Paste Magazine
Oh.
just did a review, and
Mhm.
they were like, fortunately, we feel like it actually punches at that weight class for $80
Oh,
a
that's so
bottle.
good to
So I
hear.
was like, okay, rad. Like that was a really nice validation. And the hope is like over time, once we've recouped the startup expense of it, because
Sure.
admittedly, like there's a lot that goes into the startup of a brand.
Mhm.
So hopefully over time, like we can stabilize that a little bit. But
Yeah, or either that, or like you said, start getting some of the older whiskey into it. Maybe up age statement, things like
yeah,
that. But
exactly.
I think, yeah, I think that's something that a lot of new brands face. It's like you have to kind of recoup those costs, and as long as you're putting out a quality product, I think people will support it. It's when you one aren't transparent,
Right.
two, it's not a quality product, then people start being like, okay, but is it worth it? But no, this is really good. Like I said, I haven't had a rye like this in a while.
Cool.
I think it's fantastic. 5 years now. The bourbon, is that also 5 years, or
Yeah.
is that
Yeah. So
aged?
the bourbon is
Okay.
also 5 years. And that's also aged entirely in Kentucky. Um, Yeah, we are introducing a little bit of the lower floors in the rick houses on that one, because again, like you get way more spice out of your lower floors, and since the whole intent there is way spicy bourbon, it's definitely a different approach. But I mean, like fortunately, the bourbon's done really well. Like we got some nice recognition from both like Wine Enthusiast and Whiskey Advocate, and like at the end of 23, like they were both like one of the best new high rye bourbons, which was just dope.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it's exciting that it's like, okay, all right, maybe like the whole trust the process, man, trust the process. We
Yeah,
did
no,
blinds,
I
like
mean, that's
so
gotta feel great. Just like you said, being such a new brand and just seeing like the rave reviews. That's gotta be such an empowering feeling.
yeah,
Price point for the bourbon about the same.
exactly the same. Yeah, they're line priced.
Okay,
Now,
gotcha.
now the irony is that the value here, and what I've actually had multiple people tell me, is the cast strength versions, which we are seasonal limit, like seasonal one offs. So like we just launched the cast strength rye, like it's just coming out right now. It's only $10 more, so it's at 124
Oh wow.
proof,
Okay.
but it's only $10 more a bottle. And then same thing with the bourbon, it's also sitting at about 122, 124,
Okay.
and for essentially 89. So
And it's like the same, I guess technically the same like blend, I guess, as the regular release.
generally, yes. I mean, you will see more variation in the cast strength because, like, number one, it's more
Okay.
expressive, and number two, because
Okay.
it's a seasonal, you are going to have, because if I disgorge in the spring versus disgorging in the summer, like they are very different whiskeys.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
like you can even that out when you're working with a flagship, but like on those cast strength, because it's seasonal, like you're really getting the expression of whatever it is that was disgorged at the time. So.
Gotcha. Well, very cool. Well,
Cool.
We have some Irish whiskey fans in the house, so this one surprised me. I looked at the label. I'm like, oh, this is probably a rye as well. And then I read it. I'm like, oh, okay, this is something completely different. Tell us a little bit about this next expression.
So I gotta give you like the spiel that I give all the bartenders when I'm out talking about this stuff, because it's like we talk American whiskey, we talk like Mr. Brown and like the family legacy and Old Forester and Jack and all that, right? And then it's like, so we're named after an old cowboy poem. We are from like American whiskey legends, right? So why the hell are we an Irish whiskey? And effectively, it all comes down to one person, and that person's name is Noel Sweeney. And Noel is the former master distiller and blender from Cooley, which then became Teelings. And Noel's also responsible for the creation of Kilbeggan and Connemara. I mean, like the guy is the guy's whiskey legend as well, right? So Noel was going to launch a new brand, and he had reached out to us as Altamar to work as the importer for it. And unfortunately, during COVID and everything else, the brand kind of didn't come to fruition. But he reached out and he was like, hey, I've still got some stocks that I started laying down that were intended to be kind of limited releases. Would you guys be interested? And we were like, holy shit. Okay. Like, we just launched High and Wicked, and at the time we were still waiting on the rye and the bourbon to come of age, so it wasn't even out yet. So all we had was one of these singular limited releases, and we were like, do we quickly evolve this and get into Irish whiskey right away? And so the second release was actually called the Wild Rover, but it was featured in Imbibe and Maxim and like hit all of these awards, like was named best cask strength Irish whiskey 2 years in a row. Wow. And then the next one from Noel was called an AS Coffee. It got one of the 50 best spirits of 2022. And we were like, holy crap. Like, I think we actually did something here. Mm-hmm. And so Noel reached out and he was like, well, I've got some more of this single grain, right? And for those, I'm assuming you've got folks on the channel that are like very well aware of what single grain is.
Well, but there's new folks as well, though. So please just give us a quick rundown of what that means.
Right. So like in Irish whiskey, you've essentially got 4 subcategories. You've got your blended Irish, which is your Jamesons, your Bushmills, all the things that like everybody's super familiar with. Single malt, single pot, and then single grain. Your single malt is, of course, 100% malted barley. Single distillery, pot still. Your single pot is at least 70% malted barley, 30% unmalted barley. Single distillery, pot still. And then grain is grain whiskey from a single distillery. And so in many cases, like that is the least known subcategory, but Noel was making the argument that he was like single grain Irish can be incredible. And he's like, I Noel firmly believe that this is like the unsung hero of Irish whiskey, and that there's so much single grain out there that needs to be embraced. So he was basically pushing this really hard, and we were like, okay, like you're who you are, we'll listen. So he got us, it's basically 95.5, so 95% corn and 5% malted barley, but the corn is actually coming from Provence in France, and it's an heirloom varietal of corn because the distillery, which I can't legally name, and it drives me nuts, because the distillery is so good that they can demand that level of provenance in their grain source. So he reached out and he was like, I've got some more of the single grain. It's getting to be of like a great age where we want to finish it. He's like, and I want to finish it in a rum cask. And we were like, hold on. Instead of just like going and getting any rum cask, can we please introduce you to Richard Seal from Foursquare? Because we import the exceptional casks, and this would be really cool. Like, little did we know that Richard was also working on had sent barrels for some other finishing projects. Anyways, so they talked, and Richard ended up sending casks from the Mark 10, which was the 2007 ECS release, and they finished it for 6 months and 100 proof, and like everything High and Wicked is minimally filtered, right? So we only run through like a 10 micron sock filter to just pull out barrel sediment. Everything else is like, we don't want to mess with it. So. But yeah, so this is the final result of that, and it's only just hitting. But frankly, like this is I've done 3 tastings this week, like in stores, and every single one we've done has sold out of this particular release. So it's one where we're like, okay, maybe like Noel did it again. Here we are. So
what a cool story. I was looking at my channel, so I did have a bottle of the Foursquare 2007. I reviewed it back in August of 2020.
Rad.
Loved it. Incredible. So after this, I'm actually going to, once we chase this, I actually grabbed the Foursquare 2010, which I think you said you had as well. So I'd love to do a little, maybe not like a side-by-side, because obviously they're very different, but I'd love to see, what kind of notes from the Foursquare might be coming through on this Irish whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think something that's fun is like, I think it's a fun fact is like, or a good trivia question is, a lot of people see single grain and they think, oh, that means it's a single grain, right? But like you said, it's a 95.5 mash bill.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it sounds like single grain, it's just corn, it's just barley, it's just wheat. No, that just means like, you said the description of single grain is from the same distillery?
Yeah. So the way that I always try to explain it is remove single from it, right? It's a grain whiskey from a single distillery. It's a malt whiskey from a single distillery. It's a pot still whiskey from a single distillery, right?
Gotcha.
So that's where like the nomenclature just kind of, fucks with you a little bit, because it's like, hey man, like it says single grain, but like you just told me there's 2 grains in here. Yeah, it happens all the time. Like that's
Gotcha. I'm looking at the label now because, like you said, you have all the great info here. So it says this was finished for 6 months in the casks that were used to age the Foursquare 2007. Is this aged at all with the
it
Irish
is
whiskey?
not. It is not. So
Okay.
we had an interesting discussion with Noel, because we were like, hey, our whole shtick is like transparency. We want to put all this on there, and it's like, but what is the standard in Ireland? By the way, Noel is also the I don't know if he is still, but he was the technical chairperson for all of Irish whiskey. So he oversaw the entire denomination of origin as like the technical chair, and then he's also been inducted to the UK's Whiskey Hall of Fame. So like a few other notes, but he mentioned that traditionally in Irish whiskey, if it's less than 10 years, they will not put an age statement on the bottle. And so we were like, okay, so why don't we say double cask matured? Like, so that we at least are still conveying that.
Okay.
It's not new make. It's definitely, like, I will say it's got some decent age on it, but since Noel was very much like, we don't really, he's like, and that just becomes a number that people are going to use to compare this to other Irish whiskeys. They're going to see the color, and then they're going to be like, that doesn't make sense. He's like, so, he's like, we'll just call it double cask matured. So.
Gotcha. By the way, this is 100 proof. And for those, like you said, we can't talk about the distillery, but the label does say distilled in County Cork in a continuous coffee column still. Now, I'm not an Irish whiskey pro, but I know some of you are out there. So maybe you little sleuths can find out your own info. But for now, let's go ahead and taste this one. So such an interesting, like I said, I've been drinking on this one for a while. It's just intrigued me. It's so different than anything else in my collection. I mean, I've had Irish whiskey that's been, you know what? Actually, I guess I have had Irish whiskey that's been aged in rum cask, but it's usually Jamaican rum, which is like, to me, it's a little too funky. It's not my favorite style of rum.
Sure.
But Barbados is my favorite rum. So like this just feels like a match made in heaven. It's just really, really good.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about like what notes you get from it? Because I always like to ask. I don't like to give my notes before. I love hearing what you get from it.
So I'm also, you got to understand, I tasted this before it was finished and now after it's finished. So which is also one of the like, oh wow, that's like, it's crazy how much this changed. So I had someone ask me at one of the tastings, they're like, I get all this like nice residual sweetness, like this like almost like marshmallow, like marzipan, like almond kind of thing. They're like, so is that from the rum? And I was like, no, that's actually from the whiskey. The whiskey was really creamy and really lactic. It had a really good like vanilla character to it, really kind of soft on the palate, while still like you've got a little bit of like ethanol that punches through, because to me that is also indicative of a single grain. Like you do get a little bit of like an ethanol punch. But then like the Foursquare added all these notes of like toasted coconut and pineapple, some more of these like tropical fruit notes, as well as like some floral aspects to it. So I get like little bits of like honeydew and melon. Like in general, these single grain whiskeys that we are getting from Noel are very light but like very nuanced. So there's like tons of layers in them, but they're all like these very delicate light notes. So I am curious to hear what you get too, because like I've just like totally swayed your opinion and given you like multiple notes to think about.
I mean, a little bit, but also like I already had some thoughts. So
cool.
I'm also referencing my thoughts. So first of all, I want to say like I love that proof. I think a lot of the Irish whiskey is lower proof unless you're getting like a cask strength release. So I think being at 100 proof, it really does shine and stand out compared to some of the other Irish whiskeys I've had. One note that you said that I already had noted is creamy. I mean, this is such a rich, the mouthfeel. It's so it feels almost as thick as like a cocktail, almost like on the palate. It just takes like, it has such a, now that could also be from maybe some of the rum as well. It could have had some of that influence on it as well. But you mentioned, I think you said like almond or something like that. I actually, my note that I had written down was amaretto. It reminded me of like a Di Serrano amaretto. So I think we're getting some of the same flavor notes there as well. It really has a nutty quality to it that With Irish, I don't usually get that. With Irish, I get more of like the shortbread, the typical Irish whiskey notes. But this has a creamy, like nutty, like, I know that's like a weird combo, but like it seems so different from what I've had.
So like anytime I detect nuttiness, like to me, that's always indicative of like really good oxidative stress in maturation. Okay. Because like the more like, so depending upon where you're at in the rick house, like the more oxygen you're getting flowing through there, you're going to have way more evaporative qualities develop. That's where you're going to develop like your hazelnut, your like almond, your like, again, like all your nutty notes. Right. And so like that nuttiness is almost always indicative, in my opinion, of like, wow, this is a well-aged thing. Right. And so like, and again, it like, Zopher just mentioned, I know like you'll click through the comments in a second, but like mouthfeel, right? Like that creamy lactic thing, like the oiliness on the palate in a good way, like oily in a good way. So
yeah, absolutely. And I see some other comments. I want to say hello to some folks. Eric is here as well. Cheers to you, Eric. Devin says, I do love a great corn whiskey, the custardy marshmallow. You know, so you mentioned marshmallow as well. I get that sweetness. Normally I get marshmallow on like a toasted cask, but you did say it's double oaked, or not double oak, but double cast.
Yeah.
So you are getting more different types of influence on it from the ex bourbon cast and the ex rum cast. So yeah, definitely at the marshmallow as well. Women of Whiskeys is here. Another amazing channel. They go live on Wednesday nights. You guys make sure to tune into Michelle over on Women of Whiskeys. So good to see some great folks hanging out tonight. But man, this is special. So I was looking at the website. You guys have this is the 7th release you guys have done for this.
No, so this one is this number 7. Yeah, this is number 7. We are actually about to hit number 10.
Oh wow! So you guys, and are they all Irish?
No. So number 1 was straight bourbon whiskey finished in ex-California Cabernet. Number 2 was cask strength single malt Irish finished in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks.
Oh wow!
That was
very different.
And then like we've also got long aged. We've got an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, and then we're about to have the 20-year-old single malt cask strength single barrels from Noel Sweeney's personal barrel collection that he distilled 20 years ago. And those are all called Saints and Scholars. I mean, they're one-offs, which is why we were like, we got to release these as single barrels because like this is such like unicorn level shit.
Right. Yeah. Well, like, you said they sell out. Like you do a tasting of them and they sell out so quickly.
I mean, like, and it's genuinely like it's a look back in time. Like here is a thing that a dude made, and I was actually we were interviewing him early on because we knew that it was distillate he had distilled. And we were like, man, that's got to be wild going back and tasting something you made like 18, 19 years ago. And he's like, oh, I've been tasting them the whole time. And I was like, well, sure. He's like, no, yeah, I've been tasting them. It's my whiskey. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's your whiskey. You made it. He goes, no, it's my whiskey. These are my 30 barrels that I set aside. I've taken with me my whole career. He's like, these didn't get sold. These were my barrels. And it's just like, oh, wait, we got something way more special than we thought. And so it's like...
But did he ever go into like why he felt like you guys were like the right fit for this? Like, was it something just about the brand or just the relationships? I'm just curious, like what made him give up his special barrels?
You know, I don't know. I mean, like we got into the conversations and it was like, it really was just one day, like suddenly Noel was here and Noel was like, hey, we want to work with you guys to start importing this. We love like the pedigree. We love what you guys have done. Like, again, because it does come back to like Foursquare and to Tequila Ocho and Kubler Absinthe and all these brands that we've had like since they were wee babes and like have now grown up. So, you know, and then of course, like the name Brown does like mean something in the world of whiskey. So fortunately, I think that put us in a pretty good position there. So, you know, we were at the right place at the right time. And unfortunately for Noel, but I guess fortunately for us, you know, the pandemic, you know, kind of squashed that project for him. And in turn, he was like, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it. He's like, so, you know, I think that it was all about timing and right place and right time. And okay, I mean, I guess we just do it. So.
Yeah. Well, it seems to, obviously worked out so well because it's such a delicious product. Now, you said this is just now kind of rolling out. Is it available in stores or is it kind of just like a allocated kind of release? I'm just curious to hear like availability wise.
No,
like,
so we've got a decent amount of this one because this was one where we know this is going to be special. So if we can go a little bit deeper on it, it is going to be a limited one-off, and when it's gone, it's gone. You know, like I said, the tastings, the 2 tastings I've done in the last couple of weeks, both stores that had it, they brought in an extra case or two, and we sold out of every bottle they had on site after the tasting. So it's available right now. You can find it on store shelves. Ultimately, though, if you don't find it, like ask your favorite retailer because it's still available. They can still get it. It is not allocated. It is first come, first serve. So
gotcha. Wow. And price point on this one?
This one sits at $79.99. So
Oh wow. Okay, the way you hyped it up had me feeling like we were talking the several $100
yeah,
range here.
no, like the Saints and Scholars, which are Knoll's like personal barrels, those are $500 a bottle. but
Okay, I was gonna
but yeah,
say
no,
like yeah, okay.
yeah. When it came
So
to
it's not
these,
every single release that are in these. By the way, they all look pretty similar. If you guys see this label, like make sure to look closely, make sure you see which release it is. But that's incredible. This, I mean, man, I'm gonna seek out a bottle of this. This is so good. I think it's unique. Like I said, it's different than anything else in my collection. I think it just from that proof point alone, I love that. Like I always look for like a good everyday Irish sipper.
yeah,
And at that price point, like that's like perfect for me. That's wow, that's really special.
yep, yeah. I gifted my father-in-law a bottle when we first launched it. Or when it was first coming out, which was just before St. Patrick's Day, because we're no dummies.
Oh,
like also like, hey, if we're going to put this in the market, like, hey, this is an ideal time to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened, but I think his bottle may have had an extra hole in it because it was gone within 2 days. So
I don't blame him. Yeah, if this was, like I said, I've had this for like a week or two, and I've tried to resist. I'm like, gotta save it for the stream. Gotta save it for the stream. It's so good. We have a couple shout outs in the chat. James said, Foursquare yearly 12-year rum is fantastic. Love the 2008 and 2009. Yeah. I had the 2009 left, but I grabbed the 2010 because that's the most recent one I have. I know there's been other releases as well, which actually, we still got some time. We can sip on that a little bit as well as we kind of answer any questions. You guys have any questions, please leave them in the chat, whether it's about Foursquare or this amazing Irish whiskey or the bourbon or the rye. Please let us know. Women of Whiskey's gifted 5 Bourbon Bites memberships. I don't know what it means to gift memberships, but that sounds awesome. Didn't know you could do that, but thank you. We call the Bite Club, or we called my memberships here on the channel the Bite Club. I just kind of go like, I stick with like the 80s theme, as you can tell from my branding and everything.
No, I love it.
Used to be more gaming focused. Now we've kind of shifted to more like 80s, just everything. I just recently introduced a new perk for my Patreon members where we do our monthly movie nights. So
rad.
This month we're streaming the original Roadhouse.
Awesome.
I've actually never seen it. The 1989 one. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't either. I've seen like snippets of it, and I feel so. I mean, like I studied film for a little bit in college, and I'm like, man, I feel like this is something I should have seen, right? But
yeah, no, same. Yeah, I minored in film studies, and now I work at Amazon Studios, so cool. I'm around it all the time. But Amazon just released a remake, or I don't want to say remake. Remake is looked down upon. It is a retelling of Roadhouse. But I have not watched the Amazon one. I want to watch the original one first. So we're going to do a Patreon exclusive thing next Friday. So if you guys are on Patreon, everyone $5 and up, get access to that screening. We'd love to see you there. Thank you, Donnie, for dropping the link to the Patreon page. So, and then Emily's dropping the link to your website, Heinwick. Yeah, if you guys want any questions, or if you have any, I don't want to say questions. If you guys want to find more information, that's what I was looking for. If you want to find more information about the brand, check out that. They have all their expressions listed there. I've actually been kind of scrolling through it as we've been chatting and looking at some of these awesome offerings. So thank you, Emily, for that. Question from Hunt. He says, other than Saints and Scholars, more Irish on the way.
Yes.
Well, you said he has some inside info here, maybe.
Yeah, Hunt. So Hunt used to be our Mid-Atlantic and Southeast sales director for the United States. So he's extremely familiar with a lot of these things. But yeah, no, we've got the next iteration of, so I mentioned that cask strength single malt Irish that was finished in PX. We've got the next iteration of that, and that's actually coming from the Royal Oak Distillery. So if you all know, like the guys at Walsh Whiskies, I mean, they've got some phenomenal spirits they're making. But Noel took some of that, and he's finished it not in PX, but in Amarone casks. So it's going to be a cask strength single malt Irish finished in Amarone. That won't probably be until the summer. Thereabouts, but so we're kind of waiting on that one. But Saints and Scholars, the 20 years just hitting, and then the Foursquare also just launched. So we're pretty good in Irish at the moment,
Yeah. Well, so you actually, I'm not familiar with Amarone. What kind of cask is this? I love a PX finished Irish whiskey. One from another brand came out like last year, and I absolutely wish I would have bought more than one bottle of it. Is it kind of like a sweeter wine cask?
It is sweeter, but it's nowhere near as sweet as PX. I mean, so think of it as like a lightly sweetened red wine, almost like a sweet vermouth style. And that's, I'm probably totally like, there's probably some Amarone fans that are out there. And actually I would imagine Hunt is one of those, but that are way more educated in the world of Amarone than I. But I always, from my memory, Amarone was always like, it's a bold red wine, but that has good like residual sweetness to it. So it's nowhere near as like saccharine as a PX, but it is.
Well,
it is definitely.
I love PX, but it's always a dessert whiskey. It's like I can only have like 1/4.
Yep.
Like, and that's it. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, so Women of Whiskey's Michelle said I watched Roadhouse, the original Roadhouse, in the back of a truck in a drive-in, and Donnie says he misses the drive-in theaters. Yeah, I've only, I missed that whole generation. I was born in the '90s, so I missed a lot of that. But we did have some of the like not short films, but the more indie films out here in California. Sometimes they'll do like a rooftop screening, so it's kind of like the drive-in. It's like you're in a parking garage, kind of the same vibes.
Yeah,
So, but I do miss that. It's another like '80s era thing that like, I wish I could have lived in it.
I love it.
Well, since we're talking '80s, well, let's pour. You want to go ahead and pour the Foursquare?
Yeah, I actually snuck it out of you.
2010 like that.
So
Oh no, there you go.
I wasted no time.
So you mentioned earlier that you are kind of a bit of a nerd in some ways, which we love here on the channel. Do you have a favorite '80s movie or favorite '80s video game, or it's just a vintage video game, whatever?
I mean, like classic Legend of Zelda on Nintendo, like on NES,
of course.
like
we're
for
talking
sure.
Like NES original, okay.
Yeah, OG NES. Like I was 4 years old when like my dad got me my NES, and it's like Zelda became the thing that was actually, it was Mike Tyson, like it was Punch Out, like was the first game that I was like I played religiously, and then ultimately like as I got a little bit older I was like, no, I need to master Zelda, like this is now like a big deal. Yeah, so that's a big one. I mean, like Ghostbusters for sure. Although like when I've hit my like my where I can understand what the hell's actually going on with the movie stage, like I obsessed about Terminator 2 Judgment Day for some reason. I've seen that movie like 46 times.
What's funny, that's the only Terminator movie I've ever seen. I've never seen the original. I've only seen the second one because that's the more popular one. I feel like when everyone thinks Terminator, like a lot of them think of Terminator 2. It just was like the big one. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm trying to work my way through it. Like I said, that's the whole reason I do the movie nights on my Patreon. I mean, I do it for the patrons, of course, but also for myself because I'm so behind on so many of them. Like there was, of course, the classics I always, I've watched since a kid, like Goonies and Stand By Me. Those have always kind of been my like kind of go-to, but there's so much more, like especially like the sci-fi genre. Oh yeah. Like in the 80s, it was just crazy. Like, there's some really weird shit out there.
I mean, like honestly, like anything Mystery Science Theater is also like key for me because it's just like, I'm gonna go watch some of these things that I may or may not have seen reruns on TV back then, but I appreciate how they're making fun of it. So
yeah, for sure. I was commenting on Emeroni. James said it is the bomb, not dry, good dark red fruits, again the best. And then he goes on to say Emeroni della
Valpolicella.
There we go. Red Italian wine. Very cool. Patrick Bourbon Noob says I'm too young for NES. Listen, I did not have an NES. I had a Super Nintendo. Sorry. I'm sorry. But you know what? I still played those classic games. And then Zover said The Legend of Zelda is the Zelda, like the original. Donnie says us old folks like Terminator. Okay, Donnie. Okay, I'm not no shame to Terminator, but don't get it twisted. We do it for you. Oh wait, we do it. Oh, you guys watch the movies for me because you want to see what I think of the movies. I see what they're saying. Everyone's going off around. Yeah, no, love. Like seriously, this is like not to like promote myself again, but like Patreon. You guys get on it. You guys, I put up polls asking people for recommendations of the next 80s movie to watch. So if you guys have suggestions, join the Discord community. We have an amazing Discord community. I'll drop the link to the Discord in the chat right now. But Brandon, tell me your thoughts on this Foursquare. And of course, this is the 2010, not the 2007 you used for the release. But how do you feel about the 2010?
I mean, like the 2010, I think is fantastic. I mean, but like I'm every time I get one of these vintages, I have the assumption I'm like, okay, I know what to expect. And like I do kind of know what to expect, but I'm always like really pleasantly surprised. I'm like, God damn it, this is different. It's so different. And I mean, like, because they're always 12 years old. It's always ex-bourbon barrel. Right. It's always like cask strength. But I was talking with Richard Seal, who's the 4th generation, the master distiller and blender over at Foursquare. We were in California together for a week, and we were talking about it. And he's like, I was like, so how are you crafting these differences vintage to vintage? Are you just picking different barrels? And he's like, no, we're blending down the whole life of these casks to become this thing at the end of 12 years, which is why like people are always like, why can't I get a single barrel of Foursquare? And it's because a single barrel doesn't exist there, because it's like he's always blending down over its lifespan to become the final thing. So, I mean, like this one, 2010 to me, like I've been drinking so much 2011 that's my current reference, because 2011.
I haven't bought that one yet. I haven't seen it hit my ear. I'm sure it's there. I just haven't picked it up.
Yeah. So 2011 is also just launched. So that also just launched right in March. So you're not too late to it, but like
not too far behind.
Yeah. So since we're like I'm out in the market doing this right now. It's like that's the thing I've been tasting the most.
Mm.
To me, 2010 is a little bit more lean. It's a little bit more kind of austere, so it's a little bit brighter, a little bit tighter on the palate. Whereas the 2011 is a little bit bigger, a little bit funkier, a little bit more phenolic. Like you've got more like these weird pineapple-y, banana-y kind of notes that are behind it
Ooh,
that
okay.
I don't often get on some of these Foursquare releases. Things that like I will detect nuances of in like a Jamaican rum, but we're not
Right. I was
going
going to
like,
say the description sounded like not what I normally would
yeah,
expect. I mean, I do, of course, you get some of the tropical notes that I think you get with all rums, but yeah, this like compared to the 2010, to me, this is more of like the typical. This I don't want to say I hate the word smooth when we're describing things,
yeah.
but it's one of those like even at the proof point it's at, which is by the way 120 proof.
Mhm.
I don't think it drinks that at all. Like
No.
I could drink this and be perfectly happy. But to me, it has more of those like bourbon-esque characteristics. But the 2011 sounds super interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely still got that. It's still the very bourbony kind of notes as well. Lots of vanilla, lots of like
Mm,
dark caramelized like creme brulee, right? So it's custardy, but it's like burnt
yeah,
sugar custard.
love it.
But then it's not like full funk like Jamaican rum, but it's like there's a little bit of these estery things that are in there that you don't normally get on some of these other Foursquare releases. And I will
Oh,
say
wow.
the next exceptional cask release is called Equipoise, and it's the
Okay.
first time that Richard's using ex Calvados barrels, and
Oh,
it's pretty
okay.
bonkers. So it was 10 years in ex bourbon and then 4 years in ex Calvados, right? Because
Wow.
he doesn't necessarily do finishes; he does like double maturations, where it's like he's
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
transferring, yeah, and it's wild. Like it's one of those where it's just like, holy
Ooh.
crap, dude, what did you just do? Like
Any info when that's coming out anytime soon? Or
imminent. Like it
imminent? Okay.
will in hope I'm hopeful that it will be like landing here in the United States in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then it'll have to clear
Oh
customs.
wow.
So
So
like
okay.
yeah. So like
Imminent was very vague. I'm like, okay, like in
yeah,
a year.
yeah, no.
Okay. Wow. So like proof is that one of the higher proof ones or the lower proof
That will be
releases?
higher proof, but it's also one of the
Okay.
smallest releases we've had. I think it's only like 700 cases. So that's pretty
Oh,
small for one of
okay.
these.
I
Um
will definitely be keeping an
yeah.
eye out for that. I mean, I try to buy as many Foursquare as I can. Just really, if I'm going to buy a rum, it's always honestly, like 90% of the time it's going to be Barbados rum,
Mhm.
and then half of that it's gonna be likely Foursquare labels. So
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of it. So well, I know we're right at time, but any last like do you want to shout out your Instagram? I know you do some really cool
Yeah.
videos on your Instagram where you do cocktails and you do like really thorough descriptions of these whiskeys. You want to give a shout out?
Yeah. So my personal Instagram is Brandon.Altamar. And that is where like as I'm traveling around, as I know about like new releases, or as we're like even like if I've got Richard Seal in the United States and we're traveling around, like that's where I'm gonna be posting that this stuff's happening. And then of course like the Altamar Brands Instagram as well is just at Altamar Brands. And that's for like, just the ready to update these things. But yeah, no, as an old cocktail bartender, it's like I got to dip my toe back into the water every now and again.
Of
Like,
course, yeah.
yeah.
What's your go-to cocktail? Not necessarily with these whiskeys, but or these releases, but like if you're trying to impress someone, what's the go-to cocktail you make?
If I'm trying to impress someone, like a
Okay,
really,
two questions. What's your go-to cocktail just on your own? And two, if you're like trying to like, oh, this is like a fancy cocktail.
yeah, my go-to cocktail on my own, honestly, is probably like it's going to be a variation of either a martini or like an old fashioned. Like
Okay.
I'm a keep it simple, stupid kind of person,
Yeah.
where it's like I love these iconic classics, but when they're done, just like
Agreed.
perfect, right?
Same
If I'm
here.
trying to
Yeah.
like really like impress somebody, honestly, it's gonna sound stupid, but it's a daiquiri. Because it's like I'm
Oh,
gonna make
okay.
you like one of the best daiquiris you've ever had, which means like I'm gonna use really good rum. I'm gonna use
I was
fresh
like, I've
squeezed lime
never had a
juice.
good daiquiri, so I think
Uh,
I feel like I need to hit you up and hear that recipe. Do
yeah,
you have
because
the
it's
recipe on your Instagram? Maybe I should look it up.
I mean somewhere it's there's a great article. I can't remember if it was VinePair who wrote it, but a good buddy of mine, his name's Chris Frankie, who runs a bar in DC called the Green Zone, which if anybody's in DC, like this is one of my favorite drinking establishments in the United States.
Mm.
Chris Frankie was interviewed about the daiquiri, and it's his recipe and his build that I actually reference almost all the time because like his daiquiri is just on point. And it's like, it's one of those like, it's a bartender checking another bartender to be like, all right, I'm gonna call a daiquiri and we'll see how you're gonna make it. And if it crushes it, then it's like, yeah, we're going with it. So
Yeah, I feel like I threw some shade to the daiquiri. I'm not shaming the cocktail. I'm just saying every time I've had it, it's been like in a really like really shitty bar. I've never gone to like a nice cocktail bar and had a daiquiri. So let me disclaimer that I'm not anti-daiquiri. I just have not had a good one in my life. Okay, there's someone asked a question in the chat before we go. Devin says, what's your favorite release? I assume he's talking about Foursquare.
I'm guessing so. Yeah.
I would assume that, but yeah. Do you have a favorite Foursquare?
Yeah, the next one.
Oh, okay. Oh,
no,
wow.
No,
So you're that easy.
No. That's like generally my patented response always. Like, what's your favorite Foursquare? The next one that's coming out. But no, I mean, like, to be honest, it's for me, it's more sentimental than anything. Like the release that, like, for one, like I got to go down to Barbados before we even started importing the rums, and it's like the first time
really?
tasting it was just like, holy crap! I've never had rum like this before. This is unreal. So like those
I think that's everyone's reaction for trying Foursquare for the first time. As a bourbon drinker, I never tasted rum that I enjoyed so much.
Yeah, so I mean, like the original, like the port cask, the Zinfandel cask, the 2004, those are like sentimentally important. The first one that I had, though, from like the exceptional casks where I was like, holy shit, was the Criterion. And like the first time I had Criterion. So Criterion was a double maturation. It was 7 years in ex-bourbon and then 3 years in ex-Madeira cask. And it was bottled like right at about cask strength. And it's one of those, like, I'm a self-described Madeira slut. So, like, anytime something is finished in Madeira or, like, has had Madeira barrels involved, I'm like, yes, I will have that. So, admittedly, that one was also, like, sentimentally important. And then Redoutable, which is also, that was two 14-year rums, right? One was 14 years entirely ex-bourbon, and the other was 14 years entirely ex-Madeira. Like, so there's a logical thread here. Like, Madeira's involved. I'm gonna love it. So
I will say those in the chat or during watching the replay that have followed me know I have a long history with how do you pronounce it? Redoutable?
Redoutable or Redoutable. Yeah, Redoutable.
Okay. It goes back to like 2 years. Whenever I first tried it, when it first came out, I said I just pronounced it as Redoutable, and like everyone made fun of me for that for the longest time.
Yeah, Redoutable.
And I was trying. I was like, I'm gonna fake an accent. I've never took classes in my life, but I'm gonna try it. But honestly, that's absolutely one of my favorites. If anyone asked me what my favorite was, it probably would either be, honestly, I wish I saw the 2007. That was my favorite release that I have had personally. But the second one is the Redoutable. I'm just gonna call it that because that's way easier to say.
I'm not mad at that at all, man. Own it. Own it.
Awesome. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for being a part of the stream. Always a pleasure. Hey, if you guys have any releases that outside of the world of this or just any other brands you'd love to come on and talk about, I would love to have you. You guys are up to some amazing things. It's like there's some really fun things in the works. So
can I
thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was absolutely my pleasure. Can I get you to talk about tequila at some point?
Absolutely. Listen,
awesome.
I do tequila. I typically have been doing it like during like, what's coming up? Hold on, Cinco de Mayo week stream, maybe.
I mean, we can kick the idea around. I've got some tequilas that are exciting, and I know Zopher would probably appreciate it.
There's a huge there's people that would tune in just for the tequila stream. For some reason, some people will subscribe to my channel and they're only there for the tequila stream. So
I love it.
Sounds like we should stay in touch. I'll get in touch with, of course, Aaron and everything. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for Brandon. Have a great rest of your night.
Awesome.
And like I said, you're welcome back anytime.
Clifton, thanks so much.
And those of you watching live, thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, if you're watching the replay, leave a comment below. What are you most excited to try from this lineup? For those of you that are tuning in weekly, I'll be live again next Thursday with a brand that I fell in love with at the New Orleans Bourbon Festival. It's called Dark Arts Whiskey House. So if you guys have heard about it, you probably haven't because it's slowly making its way across the country. Definitely want to tune in for that stream. But cheers, y'all. I will see y'all next week. And until then, this has been Bourbon Bites. Cheers. Brandon, thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.